Jagannatho Madguru Shri Jagadguru Madatma Sarvabhutatma Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kansachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Padashritanancha Samastachauram Shri Radhikayam Hridayasya Chauram Neelambujasyamal Kanti Chauram Chauragraganyam Purusham Namami Yo Brahmanam Vidadhati Purvam Yo vai Vedanscha prahinoti tasmai Tagvangha devamatma buddhi prakasham Mumukchurvai sharanamaham prapadye. The Divine Souls. You've been listening to Shri Krishna Leelas of the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam was originally given by Shri Krishna to Brahma. I told you on the first day that all the Puran are eternal, so of course that includes the Bhagavatam. It's an eternal scripture that is reproduced in the world whenever required. But definitely, at the end of every Dwapar Yug, Veda Vyasji comes and rewrites all the scriptures. But originally, when the Srishti began, Shri Krishna gave Puran, including Bhagavatam, to Brahma. He just sitting in his heart, made him remember it, made him know it. Then Brahma told it to Narad. If you've listened to Sri Maharajji's Narad Bhakti Darshan lectures, in the very first lecture, Maharajji tells that when Brahma gave the knowledge of the Bhagavat to Naradji, Naradji is the son of Brahma. So he gave it to his son Narad. In gist, Bhagavat has 18,000 shlokas. Brahma condensed the whole thing into four shlokas total. It's called Chatur Shloki Bhagavat. So he told those 4 shlokas to Narad. He said, Narad, this is Bhagavat, knowledge of Bhagavat. you expand on this. So that's why Naradji wrote Narad Bhakti Darshan. It's the same philosophy of Bhagavatam in Naradji's words. Later on, when Vedavyasji was here on the earth planet at the same time as Shri Krishna, at the end of Dwapar Yuga, he had already done the great work of reproducing Ved and Upanishads. He had written the Brahma Sutra or Vedanta, along with the other 5 Darshan Shastras, Nyaya, Vaisheshik, Sankhya, Yoga, the Purva Mimamsa, and then the 6th one, Vedanta. So he had produced all these 6 scriptures. He had written the other 17 Puran. He had written the Mahabharata, which includes the Gita. He had done all this great work of reproducing all the scriptural knowledge in the world, but he was still restless. He was still feeling that something was missing or something was incomplete. So Naradji came and found Vedavyasji sitting on the bank of the Saraswati River, which is where Vedavyasji's ashram was. And he said, Vedavyasji, what's going on? You look so disturbed, you look so restless. So Vedavyasji told him, I've done all this work and I still feel I'm yet to do something important. So Naradji told him, you produced all this knowledge, but you haven't produced the ras of Krishna's Leelas. You haven't written the Bhagavatam. You see, in the other Puran and in Mahabharata, it's a mix of Sakam Bhakti, Nishkam Bhakti, Bhakti mixed with Karm, Bhakti mixed with Gyan. You have to write a Bhakti Pradhan Granth, something that just firmly, purely establishes the supremacy of Bhakti, and not just Bhakti, but selfless devotion, and reveal all of Krishna's Leelas chronologically. In other Puran, you've revealed Krishna's Leelas, but not in a real start to finish type of way, and that too more like a news reporting, this happened and that happened. You have to produce a granth that has the ras of Krishna's Leelas. So Vedavyasji said, oh yes, okay, I have to write Bhagavat. So Naradji gave the knowledge of Bhagavat to Vedavyas, and then Vedavyasji wrote the Bhagavatam. But then Vedavyasji had no one to pass it on to. None of the disciples that were learning from him in his ashram, who learned Ved, etc., were qualified to conceive the bliss of Krishna's Leelas. It's like, you know how a bhains is. You give a bhains a rasgulla, or you give him a neem leaf, he doesn't care. He's just going to eat it's all the same to him. So, for an unqualified person, just telling Krishna's Leelas or telling the Bhagavatam, you can't just tell it to anybody. Vedavyasji needed the right qualified person to pass the knowledge of the Bhagavatam on. And he knew at that time there was only one such qualified individual, his own son, Shukdev. Shukdev ji, however, was lying in unconscious, nirvikalp brahmaleen samadhi. See, Shukdev ji is a unique saint. He wasn't, most saints come in this world, even Nitya Siddh Mahapurush, they come in this world simulating a material situation, so they're born just like we are. Their mother goes into labor and gives birth to them, just like in our case, although they came from Golok. Shukdev ji, who, as I previously explained, is Radharani's Leela Shuk, Radharani's personal pet parrot from divine Vrindavan. So he came when he entered the womb of Pingla Devi, Vedavyasji's wife. He stayed there for 12 years. His mother had no discomfort, but he didn't come out of the womb. And sometimes he used to correct his father if his Vedavyasji made any small mistake in any shlok he was saying. From inside the womb, he would correct him, and Vedavyasji would think, "Ye kaun hai?" And then after 12 years had gone by, finally Vedavyasji, feeling a little exasperated that what is he doing in there? Who are you anyway? So Shukadevji said, who am I, main kya bataun? I've lived unlimited lifetimes. I've been born as human, as a fly, as a deer, as a fish, as a tree. Main kya bataun ki main kaun hu? So why don't you come out? He said, Father, I've heard that as soon as the child is born, Maya makes them forget God. See, when we were all in the womb, Bhagavatam actually tells this. When the child is in the womb, there's some time where we have actual clear understanding. We know what our last life was, where we came from. We also understand what life we're going to be born into. And we also understand that Krishna has given us this body for following the path to God. That's it. So we tell him at that time that it's getting so uncomfortable in here. It's dark, it's wet, I'm hanging upside down. It's been 9 months. Please get me out of here. I promise I'll just do bhakti to you. So then the child is born. And as soon as the child comes into this world, which one of us remembered that promise we made to Krishna? We all forget. So Shukadevji said, Papa, I'm not coming out because I don't want Maya to make me forget Krishna. So Vedavyasji said, no, don't worry. You're not under the bondage of Maya. You come in this world, Maya is going to have no effect on you. So just come out. Shukadevji just appeared out of his mother's body. She didn't go into labor and give birth to him. He just appeared out of her body, and he was already 12 years old. He was already the size of a 12-year-old. And as soon as he came out of his mother, he walked out of the hut and into the jungle. Vedavyasji is looking around, what's going on? First, he doesn't come out for 12 years, and the second he comes out, he's going off to take sannyas in the jungle. Oh, son, where are you going? What are you doing? But Shukadevji couldn't hear anything because his mind, from the moment of his birth, was absorbed in the bliss of Krishna's formless aspect, what we call Brahm. So the bliss of formless God is called Brahmanand. For Shukadevji, Tam Sarva Bhuta Hridayam, Bhagavatam says, for him, everywhere he looked, he saw himself. Because he was one with Brahm. And everything is Brahm. So he saw Brahm everywhere, or he saw himself everywhere. So he couldn't hear anything except Brahm. He couldn't see anything except Brahm. None of his senses were working to perceive material things. So he couldn't even hear his father's voice. Just kept walking. He walked into the dense jungle. And when it got so dense he couldn't pass any further, he just sat down and then lay down and went into Brahmaleen Samadhi. In Brahmaleen Samadhi, the mind of that Paramahans is so absorbed. There's no motion of the body, no bodily functions at all, and no material thing. They cannot hear, they cannot see, taste, touch, smell. They're completely turned off from the material world and absorbed in the unlimited bliss of Brahm. So Shukadevji was lying in this state. Now it so happened that a couple of Vedavyasji's younger disciples, they wandered off into the jungle this day to look for some firewood for the ashram. And as they were searching for good wood, they came upon Shukadevji, a young, beautiful boy lying, glowing. But he was just lying there. They didn't know, who is he? What is he doing here? So they tried calling, hello, hello, Radhe Radhe. No response. They shook him, no response. They took a little piece of dry grass and tried tickling the inside of his nose, no response. You know how ticklish that is, right? Imagine doing that to someone and no response. Shukadevji is lying unconscious, Brahmaleen. So they went back and told Vedavyasji. He said, oh, I know who that is. That's my son. He wrote down a couple of shloks to those boys and told them to go and sing those shloks. They were shloks of the Bhagavatam. So they went and they sang one shlok describing Shri Krishna's beauty, the beauty of his form as he walked through the fields, the rolling hills of Vrindavan, grazing with the cows going ahead, Krishna and the Gwalbals coming behind, and the green pastures, Krishna's playing on his flute and looking around graciously. And as he heard this shlok being recited, because Shukadevji actually heard it, even though he couldn't hear any material thing, that shlok of the Bhagavatam penetrated his Brahmaleen Samadhi. So he heard that shlok and he actually saw that Leela unfolding before him. Practically, he was right there looking at Krishna. And he said, oh, he's so beautiful. Because up until now, Shukadevji is only absorbed in Krishna's formless aspect. Now that same formless Brahm has a form and he's smiling at me. He's so beautiful. But then he thought, no, but why would he give me the time of day? Let me go back into my Brahmaleen Samadhi. So then the boys sang the second shlok. Aho vakiyam stanakalakutam jighansaya payayadapya sadhvi lebhe gatim dhatriuchitam tatonyam kam vadayalum sharanam vrajema. Who could be a more gracious refuge than Krishna, who gave his own divine abode to the demoness Putana, who had come with the intention of killing him, and he found a way to grace her. He found any excuse to grace her. That, oh, she has come as my mother, and I drank her milk, so I have to give her the same abode my mother would have, Golok abode. Finding any reason, who could be more dayalu than our Shri Krishna? So hearing this one guna of Shri Krishna, his graciousness, his mercifulness, Shukadevji sat up, opened his eyes and asked those boys, what are you singing? What is this? Because now he had hope of meeting Krishna. He said, if Krishna is so gracious to grace Putana, he'll grace me as well. So the boys said, your own father, our Guruji, Vedavyasji, has written 18,000 shloks like this, a whole Puran called the Bhagavat Mahapuran, and he wants to teach it to you. Please follow us. So Shukadevji followed those boys back to the ashram, and then he studied the whole Bhagavat from his father. So the Bhagavatam is not only Krishna Leelas, but it also establishes some very important points. In fact, the Bhagavatam is the essence of the Gita. It is the essence of the Vedanta. It is the essence of the Upanishads. All that philosophy is distilled into the philosophy of the Bhagavatam. And one of the things that it teaches is that the bliss of Shri Krishna exceeds the bliss of formless God. Shukadevji is the example of this. How could he have been awakened out of his samadhi? He couldn't hear anything. But just like we have a glass of water here, let's say it was brimming, it was totally full, then you can't put more water into it. But something could go in, something heavier. You could put honey in the water. That will displace the water and go in. Or if you're Canadian, you can put maple syrup. The heavier, sweeter thing will go in. the ras of Shri Krishna's Leelas, the ras of Shri Krishna's personality, penetrated that Brahmalin Samadhi because it's superior to the bliss of formless God. This is one of the main principles established by the Bhagavatam. That look, Shukdev Ji, of which there is no such an example of someone in that state of absorbment, such a Jnani Paramahans as Shukdev Ji, and he abandoned that Brahmalin Samadhi, that Brahmanand, so he could go back to the, see, a Jnani, he passes Vivek, Vairagya, Shamadhi, Shat Sampatti, Mumukshutva. These 4 stages, basically of total renunciation and desire for liberation. Then the next 4 stages, Shravan, Manan, Nididhyasan, Samadhi. Shravan, listen to the teachings. Manan, reflect upon them over and over again. Nididhyasan, make it so firm in your mind there's nothing else. And Samadhi, you enter into that state of absorbment. So Shukdev Ji was in Samadhi. Leaving that, he came back to do Shravan. He went back to the beginning. I want to do Shravan of the Bhagavatam because this exceeds the bliss. It's superior to the bliss of Brahmanand. Then that Shukdev Ji, having learned the Bhagavatam from his father, Vedavyas, he told it to Parikshit. Parikshit had been cursed to die in 7 days. So he immediately signed over the kingdom to his son. And he went to the bank of Ganga and he said, I have 7 days to live. I just want to think of Krishna for 7 days. That's it. So when he made this proclamation that having left everything, I'm going to sit here on the banks of Ganga and think of Krishna, many, many saints started appearing. Vedavyas Ji came, Agastya came, Vishwamitra came. So many great saints all gathered there to give company to King Parikshit. And he asked them that, somebody tell me about Shri Krishna. I just want to absorb my mind in him. So at that time, the greatest of all came, Shukdev Ji. And they all welcomed him and gave him the highest seat. And then Parikshit said, oh, my master, I have a few questions for you. So one of them was, what should I do with my remaining 7 days? And what should a person do who has longer to live than 7 days? Although we don't know how long we have to live, but all of us think we'll live to 100. Whatever it may be, Parikshit knew he only had 7 days. We have no idea how many days we have left. We may live to 100, we may die today. But Parikshit said, what should that person do who has 1 week left to live or who has much longer to live? So Shukdev Ji said, Tasmat Sarvatmana Rajan Harihi Sarvatra Sarvada Shrotavyah Kirtitavyascha Smartavyo Bhagavan Rinam. केवल 3 चीज, श्रवण, कीर्तन, smaran. This is the same thing Kripaluji Maharaj teaches us. Exactly the philosophy of the Bhagavatam. Shravana Bhakti is what you're doing right now. Kirtan is what we were doing before that. And Smaran hopefully was being done in both cases and can also be done alone. Smaran means thinking of Krishna, remembering his Naam, Roop, Leela, Guna, Dham, Jan. So when we were doing Kirtan earlier, hopefully we were all also doing Roop Dhyan of Krishna. If we were picturing him while we were chanting his name, then we were doing Kirtan plus Smaran. And right now you're doing Shravan, so hopefully you're not thinking of the burritos we'll be eating after. that you're actually thinking of Bhagavatam and Krishna, so you're doing Shravan plus Smaran. Or you could just do Smaran. When you're driving home afterwards, if you're not the driver, you can close your eyes and just think of those Leelas of Krishna. Just Smaran, no Shravan, no Kirtan. So the Kirtan and the Shravan, the singing and the listening, those are to help us do the most important, which is Smaran. So this is the philosophy of the Bhagavatam, and this is the same philosophy taught to us by Kripaluji Maharaj. So Shukdev Ji recited the whole Bhagavatam in 7 days to Parikshit. Now we shouldn't think कि मैं भी भागवत सप्ताह सुनूंगा, मैं भी गोलोक चला जाऊंगा. People have this misconception that I am going to do just like Parikshit. Parikshit listened to the Bhagavatam in 7 days and he went to God's divine abode. Are Parikshit was God realized when he came out of the womb. He had the divine vision of Krishna in his mother's womb. Ashwatthama had shot the Brahmastra at him, right? And Krishna had saved him in the womb. In fact, when he came out of the womb, the moment he was born, he was looking around like this, looking in people's faces like he was looking for something. He was looking for Krishna. That one I saw inside my mother's womb, wo kahan hai? Ye nahi hai, ye nahi, ye nahi. He was looking everywhere. So Parikshit and us are not on the same level. Nor am I on the level of Shukdev Ji as far as a bhakta. Bhakta means the teller of the Bhagavatam, and then Shrota means the listener. So if someone is the level of Shukdev Ji as a bhakta, and someone is the level of Parikshit as a Shrota, then he can listen in 7 days and go straight to Golok. We're not at that level, so we shouldn't think, oh, let me just pay Pandit Ji to recite the Bhagavatam in Sanskrit for 7 days and I'll just keep listening, or maybe I'll doze off here and there. Maharaji was telling that, often people doze off like that during Bhagavatam, and when they wake up, they just, Jai Ho! They'll say something like that, right? So Maharaji says, what if Panditji is reciting the list of kings? There's parts in the Bhagavatam that are just listing, okay, after this king came this king, after this king came this, after this. So you just wake up and say Jai Ho in the middle of that. It makes no sense, right? And the point is, people have no idea what Panditji is saying. He's reciting it in Sanskrit. We don't know Sanskrit. So what's the point of that? There's no point. You're doing Shravan, but your mind is somewhere else because you don't understand what's going on. The point of us listening to the Bhagavatam is to hear those Leelas, even if we only hear a few Leelas, and just absorb our mind in that. Use that as a means of joining our mind with Krishna. That's part of the path of bhakti. That's doing Shravan and Smaran. So anyway, Parikshit listened to the whole Bhagavatam from Shukadev Ji, and after the 7 days, he did get bit by that poisonous snake, and then he went to Krishna's divine abode. So this is a little bit more background of the Bhagavatam. That was the first public recitation of the Bhagavatam when Shukadev Ji told it to Parikshit. That was in 3072 BCE. Shri Krishna left the earth planet in 3102 BCE, 30 years before. So 30 years after Krishna left the earth planet was the first public recitation in 3072 BCE. After that, there were 2 more quite famous recitations. One was Sanakadik Paramahansa giving a recitation on the banks of Ganga in Haridwar, on Anand Ghat. They gave a recitation to revive Gyan and Vairagya, the sons of Bhakti Mahadevi. I'll tell you about that tomorrow. And there was another public recitation after that where Gokarn recited the Bhagavatam to help his brother Dhundukari, who was stuck in the spirit world. So by reciting the Bhagavatam, he was able to help him. So this history of the Bhagavatam is actually recorded in the Bhagavatam itself, as well as in the Bhagavat Mahatmya, which is part of the Bhagavat Mahatmya comes from the Skanda Puran, part of it comes from Padma Puran. It's telling the significance and the greatness of the Bhagavatam. So one thing that is told is that after Shri Krishna left the earth, so you would have all heard Maharaji, Kripaluji Maharaj describe, or maybe other pracharaks of his describe, on Janmashtami Day especially, that you probably would have heard about Shri Krishna's appearance, which is described in the Bhagavatam. How he appears, but he's not born. In fact, he was never in his mother's womb, and his body is not formed in his mother's womb. His body is not formed of material elements, but rather is formed of Sat Chit Anand. And since he is omnipresent, he doesn't have to come from anywhere. He just appears. That much you would have heard many times. But not everybody has heard about his disappearance. When he leaves this earth, he doesn't leave his body behind. He just disappears. So when Shri Krishna disappeared from another place on the bank of Saraswati River, where Brahma and Vishnu and Shankar and all Indra and all the Devatas had come to worship him, pay their homage to him because they knew he was leaving, then he just vanished. And he reappeared in Braj. And with Radha, all the Gwals, all the Gopis, they all returned into the divine abode. So these Leelas that Krishna and Radha were doing on earth, which can be seen by even us, had we gone through Nandagaon or Barsana, we would have seen these Leelas happening. We wouldn't have known who it was, and we wouldn't have known it's a divine Leela, nor would we have experienced any bliss from that. Nonetheless, we could have seen it. Those are called Vyavahariki Leelas that are visible here on the earth planet. But the Leelas that are always happening in the divine abode and just omnipresent, because God is omnipresent, his divine abode is omnipresent, so his Leelas are also omnipresent. Those are called Vastavi Lilas. So Radha, Krishna, all the Gwals, all the Gopis, they all left this earth planet, but they're still here doing Vastavi Lilas. We just can't see them. What this means is that Braj was empty, bereft of human habitation, because all the human inhabitants of Braj were saints. They were descended saints from Golok abode. Gopis, Gwalbals, they all went back with Radha Krishna. So who was left living in Braj? See, before Krishna left the earth planet, he had told Arjun, take all the queens of Dwarika out of Dwarika and bring them to Braj. So Arjun did that. He brought them over there. And then you would have heard the Leela, how all of Krishna's family living on Dwarika, they started fighting and they all killed each other. So that was their Leela style of going back to the divine abode. But the queens survived, and they came and lived in Braj. And Shri Krishna's great-grandson, his son of him and Lakshmi, Rukmini was the descension of Lakshmi. So Krishna and Rukmini's main son was Pradyumna. His main son was Aniruddha. His eldest son was Vajranabh, Shri Krishna's great-grandson, Vajranabh. So Parikshit, who is the ruler of all of India, he assigned Vajranabh to be the ruler of Braj. And the only ones there with him were the queens, Krishna's queens of Dwarika. So he asked, one day he went to King Parikshit and he said, I'm the king here in Braj, but there's no praja. I'm not the king of anyone. There's nobody for me to look after, nobody for me to be the king of. Where is everybody? So Parikshit said we should go and ask Shandilya Maharshi. They went to the great saint Shandilya Maharshi, and he explained this Vastavi Lila, Vyavahariki Lila concept, that everybody disappeared. They all went back into the divine dimension, so they're not visible here in this material plane anymore. So Vajranabh said, what should I do? Shandilya gave him Agya. He said, you go, with my grace, you're going to be able to recognize each place. You go to each place around Braj, all the Leela places, where Krishna did the Kalyanag Leela, where Krishna killed Aghasur. So all these Leela places, you go there and you meditate on Krishna, and you're going to know which Leela happened there. And then Parikshit, you go to Hastinapur, modern day Delhi, and you start bringing people from there to inhabit Braj. So he started bringing people who could build up the places over there. So they started building temples, ponds, sarovars, monuments, ras mandals, so that all these places could be commemorated, all these Leela places. And then people started moving in from Hastinapur at the behest of King Parikshit. So this is how Braj was repopulated. But for many decades, in fact, Braj was just jungle. Nobody was living there and nobody remembered where any of the Leela places happened until Shandilya Maharshi told Krishna's great-grandson, Vajranabh, to go and do that seva of reestablishing all of these places. And that's how we have them nowadays as well. Although Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Ji also gave a similar agya to Rup and Sanatan Goswami. When he told them to go and live in Vrindavan, he also told them, you have to go and make sure all these Leela places are properly marked and commemorated. So they reinvigorated or refreshed all of those Leela places again 500 years ago. So that's how we know about all these places nowadays. And of course, the Leela descriptions are preserved in the Bhagavatam, which was written by Veda Vyasji himself, who also is an avatar of Shri Krishna. So we have the authentic knowledge of the Bhagavatam, the authentic Leelas of the Bhagavatam, and all of that is for our smaran. And if we ever go to Braj, then we can also have that faith. We can look with faithful eyes and feel that excitement that this is where this Leela actually happened. And in spite of the modern world having encroached on these Leela places, and there's lots of hustle and bustle and stores and these kinds of things, but the places are still marked. And you can still go there with a faithful heart and see them and feel the excitement of knowing that Radha and Krishna walked in these very places and did Leelas. So we have a little bit of time left. I'm going to finish the Leela I told you that I started yesterday, when Krishna was tied to the ukhal. He started dragging that ukhal, and he dragged it off towards these two Yamalarjun trees. They were standing side by side close enough that the ukhal couldn't fit between it. So Shri Krishna went and he crawled between the two trees, but the ukhal got stuck. So then he kept pulling like that. Now a 2-year-old kid, what could he do to two big huge trees? But Shri Krishna just kept pulling, and that ukhal just caused those trees to fall over. And the Gwalbals who were around, who were a little bit older than Krishna, because Krishna was only 2 years old, they saw two light figures, like two men came out of the trees and then just talked to Krishna briefly and vanished. So who are these two men? They were the two sons of Kuber. Kuber is the celestial god of wealth. He lives in the Swarg, and he's the god of material wealth. He has two sons. One is called Manigriv, and the other one is called Nalakubar. So these two one time were very disrespectful to Naradji, actually. They were out playing in some river or some pond, and firstly, they weren't wearing any clothes. Secondly, they were intoxicated by having drunk alcohol. And Naradji came along, and they didn't acknowledge him at all. In fact, they were just disrespectful. So Naradji said, look at the effect of wealth on people. Never mind the alcohol, these two are intoxicated by their wealth and their status. It's a very dangerous thing. You give anybody wealth, status, fame, they'll be lucky if they survive unscathed, because that intoxicates the intellect and we become proud. And then we could do any kind, we could disrespect anybody. We could disrespect God. So Naradji decided to grace them by cursing them. He said, okay, you're standing around here naked doing Apaman to Varun, the god of the water, and you're being disrespectful to me because of your drunken state and also your intoxication of wealth and power. So I'm taking all of that away from you. I curse you both to be born as trees. A tree is naked. It stands naked all day long for years and years. So you're going to learn your lesson. And you'll be without power, wealth, fame, anything. So when they begged him for forgiveness, then he said, okay, you still have to be born as trees, but at the end of Dwapar Yug, when Shri Krishna takes avatar, he's going to release you from this life form. So they were born as those two Yamalarjun trees, and then that day Krishna saw them, okay, it's time to release Manigriv and Nalakubar from this form, so he just knocked over the trees and they fell, and the two of them came out like that and just did pranam and thanked Krishna and then went back to the Swarg, went back to the celestial abode. So those Gwalbals saw all this happen, but when they tried to tell Nanda Baba and the older gopis, they all just said, no, these boys make up stories, it can't be. Our little Krishna caused these trees to fall over, because imagine two huge trees came crashing down. Then Nanda Baba came running. What happened? What happened? And he just found Krishna there, not even a hair on his head out of place in the midst of these broken down trees. So he picked him up and asked what happened. But then when he got the report from the Gwalbals, he didn't believe them, because to him, Krishna was not God. How could Krishna have the power to pull over the trees? Krishna's just my little boy. So only the Gwalbals knew the secret of what had happened. All of these events where Shri Krishna kills a demon or anything like that, they all have a gracious intention behind them. Whether it was Shakatasur, who was also cursed by the sage Lomash to become bodiless, because Utkach was, he was the son of Hiranyaksh. Hiranyakashipu, Prahlad's father. His younger brother was Hiranyaksh. So Hiranyaksha's son was Utkach. He was also very powerful, Prahlad's cousin. So he was so powerful, one day he was just going around and smashing the trees around sage Lomash's ashram, so the sage cursed him. He said, you're going to become bodiless. So he actually had to enter into a horse cart, a two-wheeled horse cart. And he also begged for forgiveness. Lomash said, when Krishna comes, you'll get the touch of his divine lotus foot, and then you'll be released from that form. So they were having a celebration. Krishna was 3 months old, and he had just rolled over on his own for the first time. So when that happens, you have to have a big celebration. they had a big celebration, but Krishna got tired. So Maya put him down to rest in the shade underneath that bullock cart. And on the bullock cart, there was all kinds of pots of curd and milk and all kinds of things. Now, Krishna, of course, knew this is Shakatasur, and I have to grace him. So Krishna started crying. He got hungry. But Maya couldn't hear him because she was busy with all the guests. So out of his anger of not being fed, he started kicking his little feet. So his little tiny 3-month-old foot just hit that horse cart, and the whole thing flew up in the air and smashed down upside down, smashing all those pots. And that's how he released Shakatasur. So people, hear the story of Krishna killed this demon and that demon, and of course, especially kids, especially little boys, love hearing all these stories. More so than Krishna doing ras or anything like that, right? They like the fighting stories. But there's always a gracious reason and a gracious intention behind every act of God. And of course, even killing the demons is not really killing them. It's releasing them from that form and gracing them either to go back to their abode, or in the case of Shakatasur, he went to the divine abode. Tomorrow I'll tell you about a time when Krishna sent the Gwalbals to beg for some food from some Brahmins, and they got turned away. So what happened after that, I'll tell you tomorrow, and tomorrow is actually the last day of this lecture. So I'll also tell you about the 2 other famous public recitations of the Bhagavatam, Gokarn reciting it and Sanakadik Paramahans reciting it. Bolo Vrindavan Bihari Lal Ki. So let us do a few minutes of Kirtan. Please do Kirtan plus Smaran, not just Kirtan. Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe, Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe.
He Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe.
Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe, Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe.
Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe, Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe.
Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe, Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe.
Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe, Radhe Radhe Govinda, Govinda Radhe.
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 Radhe राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे
जय
गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
राधे राधे गोविंद गोविंद राधे 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 गोविंद गोविंद राधे
बोलो Bolo Vrindavan Bihari Lal Ki
Jai.
It's quiz time now. Who can tell me where the Bhagavatam originated from? Somebody gave it to somebody, first of all. Yes. Good. Shri Krishna gave it to Brahma. Then, what's after that? Wait, see if somebody else knows. Who? You were saying?
Brahmaji gave it to Naradji in 4 shlokas.
That's right. Brahma gave it to Narad. Then, who else knows? Yes. Yes, Naradji gave it to Vedavyas. Then?
Vedavyas gave it to Shukadev.
Yes, Vedavyas gave it to Shukdev. And who did Shukdev ji tell? Parikshit, that's right. And then the whole world knew because that was a public recitation. What year did Shri Krishna and Radharani disappear from the earth planet?
30.
Jigna? Yes, 3102 BCE. Do you know, does anyone know by chance what year they appeared? 125 years before for Krishna, 126 years before for Radha. So 3228 BCE for Krishna, 3229 BCE for Radha. And what year, so then they disappeared in 3102. Then what year was that public recitation of the Bhagavatam? Neha knows. I saw her writing. What year did Parikshit hear the Bhagavatam from Shukadev ji, the first public recitation? Yes, correct. 3072 BCE. 30 years after Krishna had disappeared from the earth. Good. What were the Yamalarjun trees? Were whose sons? Kuber's sons. What were their names? Anybody remember? What? Mani Grieve. Mani Grieve. Nalakubar. That's right. What else can I test you on today? What's that? Oh, the 2 types of Leelas. Yes. Okay. What are they? Or tell me one of them. Shelly, you know? Okay, tell the one kind. Without the name, just the definition. Right. So what's that called? The one that's happening in the omnipresent divine dimension but can't be seen. Vastavi Lilas. That's right. And the other one is what? Yes. Vyavahariki. That's right. Vyavahariki. And what's that?
It's when they're like here, but then we can't.
No, the Vastavi Lilas are the ones that are here, but in the divine omnipresent dimension and can't be seen with material eyes.
It's on Earth.
So the Vyavahariki Lilas are what? Happening on earth and can be seen by anyone. Even us with material eyes. Okay, who was, oh yeah, that was the other one. Who was Krishna's main son that he had with Rukmini? And who was his main son? And who was his son? Vajra Nab. Vajra Nab. That's right. And asked this great saint, Shandilya Maharshi. That's right. He also wrote a Bhakti Sutra. Naradji wrote Narad Bhakti Sutra, 84 sutras. Shandilya Maharshi wrote 100 sutras called Shandilya Bhakti Sutra. But Maharajji says that's very difficult to understand. Narad Bhakti Sutra is good for the people of Kali Yuga. Bolo Ladli Lal Ki Jai. Shrimat Sadguru Sarkar Ki Jai. Jai Jai Shri Radhe, Jai Jai Shri Radhe, Jai Jai Shri Radhe. This clock used to be on the wall.